He's what they call a booth babe. For
Oh,
some
which
of
by
you
the
that know
way,
what that is.
yeah, that was one of the possibilities for names for this podcast, which I'm glad we didn't go that way because I didn't know that that's what that meant, but uh
Yeah,
it's for like
it's
hot girls that hang out at booths to bring people to the booth, which like I
mhm.
mean we're hot, but yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome to Behind the Booth. I'm Jade, and with me as always is my co-host and sponsor, Heather.
And on this channel, we talk about wild stories from Comic Con vendors because Jade is a Comic Con vendor. She is Tokyo Dog Designs and she has a beautiful booth. We would love to meet you. We have a list of all the ones that we're going to be going to, so please find us if you're in town. Even if you're not in town, come like take a road trip and come see us because we would love to meet you. But today we're actually we talk a lot about stories that are like fun and like good things that happened, but honestly, there are a lot of like rough things that happen. Like there are a lot of bad experiences that you can have. And this is not indicative of like, the people that you're with or anything. We've had actually really good interactions with the people that work conventions, and this one happens to be about public transportation to and from the convention. And it was like it wasn't all bad, but there was just really rough time. There was one time that was not so good. And so when we were in Florida, when we were at MegaCon, which I which I really recommend to all of you. It was a lot of fun, and we will probably be going back next year.
Yeah, we signed
But
up, so we'll be there.
we
We
will
already
be
paid for the
there next
booth.
year. That's right. I forgot you did already pay for the booth.
Yeah, I already paid for it.
And we were in a hotel that was what was it like 2 miles, maybe 1.5 miles, 5 miles?
It was, but the neighborhood was not exactly safe.
No, it was not. It was very like, I mean, if you've been to Florida, if you've been to Orlando, everything's very sprawling. It's not like a city where there's just like buildings everywhere. And,
Mhm.
we live near Denver, so you can just kind of walk places.
Mhm.
And, there's always stuff around. It wasn't a very safe place, and you would have to cross a really big highway to get there.
Yeah,
And
it was pretty
I
bad.
really did not feel comfortable doing that. And it was like so there was a bus that took us from our hotel to the convention center and back. um and we generally didn't have bad experiences. There was one time Jade got to sit next to Boba Fett, little goofball that he was. He did a lot of like Boba Fett cosplay, and he did like a Hawaii or like a vacation Boba Fett. It was really really sweet.
Yeah, you can follow him at Mr. Fett.
Mr. Fett, yeah.
Mr. Fett. Yeah, so the bus situation, if it's at all possible for these events, I always try to get a hotel that is walking distance.
Yeah.
Um, because there's so many people and I don't like to rely on other transportation to get me where I need to go.
Hence
And
this story.
hence the story. Now the nice thing about the bus is that it was complimentary. And that can be really nice because when you're a vendor, you have to track every single cost.
And
Because you
Ubering can
can't
get
say, oh,
expensive.
yeah, you can't say like, oh, I made $2,000 at MegaCon, but I had 2,100 in expenses. Like, well, then you didn't make that. So it's, understanding how those numbers work out. So anytime that, we can be aware and conscientious of cost, we try to do that. So this bus, for whatever reason, they didn't have enough bus drivers or something was happening with it. And so there was a line of us and we almost made it on one of the buses. But there was just this giant line and we were stuck and we waited probably what, almost an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And it's the end of
There
the day.
was,
So
yeah, and there was gridlock on the highway. Like I think there was some kind of sports. I'm clearly into sports, but I think there was something going on that there were just tons of people around. And
mhm,
so like nobody was getting in, nobody was getting out. It's not like we could call an Uber and they would get there.
mhm.
Like they would
Yeah,
be stuck just where
it
the
was
buses
not
were
going to
too.
happen. Yeah, there's some kind of event going on and the buses couldn't get back. They didn't have enough buses. Now, the team of people that were there making sure that the buses were arriving and telling us what bus to get on, they were awesome.
They were
And these buses were
fantastic.
like those coach buses. They're big. It wasn't like those little tiny shuttles. Like it was a massive bus that you put like a sports team on. And they had little like USB ports and stuff. It was really cute. It was a really nice bus.
Yeah.
Somehow sponsored by Google. I don't know how that worked out, but whatever.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, yeah, they were sponsored by Google. So
Sure. Why
that's
not?
how all their sponsorship went. Heather had no idea. And so yeah, we're waiting for this bus, and I'm getting hungry, and that's never a good thing. Um, and we are trying to figure out like, well, do we try to go on these bicycle puller people? Do we try to get an Uber and see if we can get any faster?
Oh, and
Do
this
we
was
walk?
Saturday, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
was the longest day.
it was the
Like,
longest
we had
day.
been there a long time and she was exhausted. We were hungry. It was getting dark.
Hmm.
And so like I was like I don't want to walk if it's just us and I guess a group of people left, but we kind of missed them and I was like I was just we were just so tired and we were getting hungry. And yeah, they had like those little like rickshaw bike people,
Hmm.
but it was how much was it? It was like
It was gonna
10
be,
good
I think it was 25 dollars a minute
per
and
person.
per person. And the hotel he said was about 7 minutes away.
And we're like,
I'm like,
we can't,
what?
right? And he
So
wouldn't
I
even
was,
like. He was like, "Well, it's 7, but it's as as fast as I get there." I'm like, "Okay, but we can't spend
yeah,
hundreds of dollars." Like
yeah,
that
to get
was,
out of here.
yeah,
So luckily in my carry pack that I had trail mix and I had some Cliff Bar type things. I think they're Quaker Oat bars. I think it's what the actual brand is. I had water. So I was able to tide myself over, which is why I say always put what you have to have in your pack. And I also needed to take some painkillers. And
yeah,
so I just happened to have those also in my pack. And I gave Heather first choice on what she wanted, and then I took whatever was left as far as the foods were concerned. And eventually we did make it to the hotel, but I got to sit next to Boba Fett and I was talking to him. And the day that I was talking to him, he was wearing the Mandalorian armor. So, like the traditional, how you think of Boba Fett. And when he was talking, he had a little speaker in his, or like a little microphone thing in his helmet, but the speaker was somewhere on his body. So when he was talking, he actually sounded a lot like the 1970s version of Boba Fett, not the newer one where he has the I think he's from New Zealand. He didn't have the New Zealand accent. But this guy was
hmm.
talking and he sounded a lot like the original actor. And I was like, "Where is your speaker?" And he's like, "Are you sure you want to know?" I'm like, "What is it, in your crotch or in your ass or something? Like, what am I missing here?" He's like, and Heather, that's the only part of the conversation Heather hears. And she's just like, "What are you asking him?"
Right. I'm like, "What are we talking about? What? Who is that?"
And he's like, "No, it's in my belt." And he did his little utility belt thing that he was wearing had a little tiny speaker in it, but it sounded really cool. And he's what they call a booth babe. For
Oh,
some
which
of
by
you
the
that know
way,
what that is.
yeah, that was one of the possibilities for names for this podcast, which I'm glad we didn't go that way because I didn't know that that's what that meant, but uh
Yeah,
it's for like
it's
hot girls that hang out at booths to bring people to the booth, which like I
mhm.
mean we're hot, but yeah.
Well, and they're not always scantily clothed.
No,
Um, and
they're
but
just eye candy.
it's I can, yeah. And so some booths will have things like either a minor celebrity or a cosplayer or something at their booth where people come up and take pictures, and it's just to attract people to your booth. How I attract people to our booth, I think we covered this in another episode where I have a sign that says, "Yes, you can touch," and I have things they can touch on my booth. But literally, some people, cosplayers, are paid to professionally stand at booths and talk to people and take pictures and stuff. So that
Yeah,
was what his job was.
yeah.
Um, and he offered to take off the helmet to show me where all the stuff was in on the inside. I'm like, "No, you'll break the illusion." I was like, "I want to." And he didn't have his own Instagram for this cosplay that he did, so he actually made one and
While we
brought
were
it to us
talking
on
about it,
Sunday.
yeah.
Yeah, and brought it to us on Sunday. Took a picture and everything. And so I have some video of us on the bus with him. And I do post a lot of stuff of like getting Starbucks at conventions and getting on public transportation and how people are all dressed up and how different it is,
Yeah.
how our commutes look compared to most people's commutes. So
Yeah.
but he was some of that bus thing was pretty miserable, and there literally was no hotel closer that we could afford. So
Yeah.
next year we were saving our pennies and getting the hotel that's attached to the convention center this time,
Yeah.
so we don't have to go through that again.
It even has a walkway, like you don't even have to go on
The
the street.
skywalk.
Like it's yeah,
Mhm.
skywalk. It's gonna be really
It's very
nice.
preppy. It's very, very
Yeah.
preppy. So
But you gotta really like we have to do it like right away because I think
yeah,
that's the one that like sells out right away. So
sells out fast, and it's like almost $500 a night.
yep.
And the hotel we were at was $125 a night. So
But then you gotta
huge
deal with the
difference.
bus. Like there's
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. It was a little bit. It's like, well, I almost killed somebody because I was hungry. So I have to make sure. Although at the hotel that night when we got back in, we went straight to the food, like almost immediately. And they had some
Hmm.
kind of like barbecue
Yeah,
thing set up and it was like $12. It was
it was
super cheap
so good.
and it was really good. And again, Heather likes to watch The Office. Every time we're at a hotel or at an event, somehow she magically finds the show The Office. And
It's
I'd
always
never,
on. It's always playing on something, and I'm like, okay, this is something that I know I like, and I can always find it on the TV. So,
I haven't watched the American version. I've only ever seen the British version. And so every time she's watching The Office, I'm like always doing stuff. I'm prepping for the next day, or I'm taking a shower, or I'm eating, or I'm, doing accounting or whatever it is, because there's so much to do after you're back in the hotel room.
yeah.
It's not like, okay, I'm done. I mean, this is why I'm so prepared for everything. But I had things to do and I had books to settle and I had to make sure that I was doing the right tax rate. And there's all this stuff that I'm doing and then plugging everything in at night to make sure it all charges. So I never see a full episode. So we had this barbecue and I wasn't going to do anything else. I was going to eat. I was going to sit and eat. And I knew if I sped ate like I wanted to, I was going to get sick. So she's like, we'll watch an entire episode of The Office.
Hmm.
And she's like, you'll have that whole time to eat and watch The Office. So I'm eating real slow, trying to be careful and not make myself sick. And I watched an entire episode. It was the first time since we've been traveling together for 2 years that I ever watched a single episode of The Office with Heather.
And it was really cute too. Like, if you guys watch The Office, she was asking me, like, so why don't those two get along? Like Jim and Dwight. She's like, why do they
Yeah.
have this like power struggle? And so I'm trying to like explain that. And she's like, well,
Mhm.
are those two dating with Jim and Pam? And I'm like, well, almost, but not quite, but they really like each other. Like, there's just,
Yeah.
stuff that I'm like, oh my gosh. I don't think I've, like, I don't know, The Office is one of those really divisive shows. Like, you either love it or you hate it. Because for a lot of people, that like weird, awkward comedy is really not their
Mhm.
thing. And so they're like, I
Yeah.
can't handle it. So I rarely talk to somebody who hasn't seen The Office because if they haven't, is because they won't. Like, they're like, no, absolutely not. I don't want to talk about it. So it's kind of fun to like explain like the dynamics of the
Well,
relationships and
and we
everything.
like we like so many of the same shows. Like
Yeah.
we like Parks and Rec,
Stranger
um,
Things.
Stranger Things. You put up with South Park. I love South Park. I love Beavis and Butthead. I love that type of
Yeah.
humor. There's the most moronic humor possible, which is so funny because Mike Judge is so smart. Like he's absolutely brilliant, but he writes like the most ridiculous content. So yeah, and then there was that guy at Florida that dressed up as Dwight, right?
As
With the
Dwight.
Jello.
Oh my gosh, yes. And he had a whole resume of Dwight and had his special skills and everything. And he had a card that you could call for, oh my gosh, that's right. So he had a card you could call, like, to talk to Dwight, but it was a Rick roll. But it took me forever because I always forget how that song starts. And so like I have it on speaker. He's sitting there, Jade's sitting there. They both like immediately know what it is, and I'm just sitting there like, what is this? And then I'm like,
I'm trying not to
oh,
ruin it.
that took forever because like I don't know until it does the da 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 da, and I'm like, oh, that's it. Okay. Oh my goodness. I just sat here for like 2 minutes while you both are like, really? You don't get it yet? It was very funny.
So it was, and this whole person had like a whole set of things. And so I recorded this interaction of the two of them, just because it was, I understood part of it, but I didn't get all of it. So
Yeah.
yeah. So, well, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and a special thank you to Nerdy Girl Podcast for sponsoring this episode.